Welcome to November office hours for Alfresco, and it is November 12th of 2015, and we're joined today by the User Assistance Team at Alfresco, part of the engineering team. We've had this office hour scheduled for a while, but various vacations and other problems made it really hard to get a time, so we're really excited. We've collected questions months ago and have reviewed those questions and prepped, and now we're ready to answer the questions and take additional ones. If you want to participate, if you're watching the video on YouTube and want to participate in the online discussion, go to chat.alfresco.com, and I'm in the chat channel, and a few of my colleagues are as well, and we'll be able to engage there and look for your questions. A couple quick announcements. Next office hours I haven't figured out yet. With the holiday season, it'll probably be in January or February sometime. It's probably time to have on Doug or one of the other people we've already had on a while back. So I need to make some invites and figure out when schedules work. Next Tech Talk Live, however, is also to be determined. We're trying to put together Tech Talk Live on custom content model management. The new in Alfresco 5.1 soon to be released, and Community Edition's already available. You can define content models in the GUI. And we want to talk about how those are built and what goes on under the hood. So we're trying to get the team together to do that, looking for scheduling stuff as we move into the holiday season. So Oli's working on that. Pay attention to the Twitter feed or alfresco.com/community to see it on the calendar. There have been a few Tech Talk Lives that you should make sure you see. The most recent one was on virtual folders, and you can see that on the YouTube playlist. Performance tuning was one before that, and records management. So really good topics, really useful sessions. That's in the Alfresco 101 channel on YouTube. Next announcement is the Order of the Bee, the Alfresco community open source community group, have organized their first BeeCon. It's going to be on April 28th and 29th in Brussels. So you're all invited. You can go to beecon.buzz to see it, or you go to the orderofbee.org to link there as well. I'm really looking forward to being there. I know that most of my colleagues are hoping to be there, but we can't send the entire company, so I don't know quite how we're going to figure that out. So we'll see how that goes. And last announcement is, of course, our user research team that we had on office hours last time before. They still are looking for people, especially end users, but if you're an IT professional, if you can get your team involved, they can help us evaluate the usability of the products we build. So alfresco.com/UX research, all one word, will take you to a place to sign up for that. And then we'd love to reach out to you and have you participate in our studies, or your colleagues as well. So with that brief set of announcements, we have the user assistance team here. We do have one member of the team whose browser crashed just before it was time to start, so hopefully he'll join in just a moment. But team is led by Helen Mulally, who's been my colleague for many years now, and it's been fun to grow our careers together at Alfresco and work together. So Helen, I'm going to let you introduce your team and explain a bit about what your team does.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Yes, I'm Helen Mulally. I'm the manager of the user assistance team. And as Richard said, I've been manager of the team for nearly 4 years now, but I've been at Alfresco for a total of 7.5 years. And I actually started as a technical writer with the initial team of 4, I believe it was, three writers and the manager. And over the years, the team has grown. It's not much bigger. We've got 6 now, including myself. But the team has grown and changed over those years. I'm really pleased that everybody's here today to introduce themselves as well. So the user assistant team is responsible for the Alfresco product documentation. And I guess the most visible side of that, what you see is through the documentation site. So you'll notice that we call ourselves the user assistance team now rather than documentation. And this has been a fairly recent change, a rebrand, if you like. And the reason behind it is that we were starting to do more than what is traditionally known as documentation. So, for example, we were producing more and more short how-to videos, mostly for the end user, but we're now doing more specific videos for various products and features. So you'll see, for example, a media management video, and also up and coming the model manager video that will be coming up with the next release. But also were having much more influence over the instructional text within the Alfresco user interface, so within the product itself. So we're getting more involved in reviewing and, in fact, writing the UI copy. So any kind of text on a screen, we would also consider that to be documentation, if you like. So it's all part of this sort of user assistance. And along with that, we're now driving and directing the terminology and the tone of voice within the product. So really sort of user assistance correctly represents the complete work of the team. But we're quite easygoing still about the name, and people still call us the docs team, so we still don't worry too much. We're not hung up on the name. So so in terms of the team, everyone works on an area of the documentation based on a persona. So for example, the end user, the systems administrator, or the developer. And I guess the only other exception is for things like the integrations or connectors, where it makes more sense to work on the full documentation set. So media management is a good example, Outlook integration, for example. The other persona that we've identified is the business user, and it's something we've been thinking about for a while, and we're aware that we need to improve upon that particular area. So most of the team, we're based in Maidenhead. We sit within the same area as the engineers, and we're really close to where customer support sits as well. So we're really sort of involved both logically and physically within the engineering team. So that's where we sort of take a lot of our input and we get a lot of our reviews. So I think that's sort of really important to know that that's where we're sort of we're part of that whole area, not just a member of the engineering team itself. So on that note, I will let the rest of the team introduce themselves. So I hand over to Andy first.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Hi, my name's Andy Healy. I develop user assistance for the end users, so not the developers or admins, but the people who are actually using Alfresco products during the daily work. I'm involved in producing a wide range of stuff, including online help, tutorial videos, and the UI terminology that Helen was talking about. I've been at Alfresco for 3 years next week, which seems to have actually gone really quickly. I've covered products including Alfresco 1, Community Edition, Alfresco in the Cloud, Records Management, Alfresco Analytics, Alfresco for mobile on Android and iOS, and probably some others as well. Prior to working at Alfresco, I worked for and with Microsoft, Autodesk, Roche, and GE, amongst others. That's it from me, I think.
Okay. Manu?
I was going to say really quick that Andy gave one of the first Alfresco lightning talks, Ignite style. Was at DevCon or Summit a few years ago? I was so impressed.
Thanks, Richard.
So, sorry, Manu, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Manu, and I have been with Alfresco for around 3.5 years now. I'm mainly involved in writing system administration documentation. Regarding my past experiences, in the last 12 years, I worked as a technical writer with companies from different domains, such as banking, telecom, mapping. So prior to joining Alfresco, I was working with Microsoft in their technical documentation department, writing end user and technical documentation for Bing Maps. With Alfresco, it's been a great journey so far. And the best part about being with Alfresco is that I feel excited and look forward to coming to work every day. So, back to Helen.
Thank you. Okay, Sophie?
Hi, I'm Sophie McMonigal. I've been with Alfresco for nearly 2 years now, so I'm the baby in the team in one manner or another anyway. But I've been in technical authoring for the last 10 years and 20 years in total in IT. So I look after, with Manu, the system admin persona, but I specialise mostly in the integrations that Helen was mentioning. So we're developing a lot in the integration area, so things like media management, analytics, the Outlook integration, Alfresco Office services. So these are very much things that we're focusing on, and they've got a big impact on the system administrator. We also mentioned videos, so I've been doing some videos, UI copy as well for those areas, and also looking at the installation and configuring where that's appropriate as well, where we need two people. I'm also a bit of a Scrabble fanatic in my spare time, which doesn't really lend itself to Alfresco in the simple and smart language that we look for, but it's good fun anyway.
Thanks. Hey, Tony?
Hi, I'm Tony. I'm Senior Technical Writer here at Alfresco, and I've been here for just over 4 years. I've got fairly long experience working in the software industry. I've done a number of roles, lots of technical writing, technical training, even a bit of development work. I've worked for a number of companies in the past, indeed, with like MySQL, Electronic Arts, to name a couple. My main responsibility is developer documentation here. So things like the mobile SDK for Android, I did all the docs for that, and also for mobile SDK for iOS. And more recently, I'm working on the developer docs revamp for 5.1, and I'll probably show you a bit more on that, what we're doing with that later. So I think that's it for me, so handing back to Helen.
Thanks. I'm hopeful that Tim has got his speaker working. Tim, can we hear from you?
I think so. Is that
good.
working?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, my apologies. I've been in IT for nearly 27 years, and I can't even get my Google Hangouts working. I worked for IBM. My name's Tim Raff. I worked for IBM for just under 25 years as a software engineer in transaction processing and messaging and queuing, which is sort of related to what Alfresco does. I was also a performance engineer, and I worked for the last 4 years there, I think, as a technical writer. And that's what I do for Alfresco. I joined in 2010. First thing I was also working on developer docs, or at least that's what I was employed for. And I wrote the OpenCMIS API guide, which is contributed to chemistry. I think that was the first thing I did. I then got into setting up the publishing system that we initially used for getting Alfresco docs online. That was using what were Eclipse info centers. That's changed now, so hopefully you have a better user experience that doesn't include 1990s frames technology. I've worked on various other pieces of doc. Most recently, I did the doc for the activity, the new activity product. And currently I am helping out Tony on the developer docs.
So we have our first question from the chat channel, and it's a really important one. Are there any openings on the team, Sujay would like to know?
When can he start? Seriously, I at the moment, no. But I think that my main role in this job is to get as many writers as possible. As I've already mentioned, we've not grown a huge amount in all this time that I've been at Alfresco. I thought we might have doubled the team by now, but unfortunately, we don't always get the heads for this particular area, which is really disappointing. And we're always needing more people in the team. But yeah, but keep in touch.
So we don't. To summarize that, then we don't have an official posting at alfresco.com careers at the moment. But if you're really interested in joining the docs team, do send your information.
Please do. Yeah.
And would that be at info@alfresco.com or?
I apologise. I was going to say, as soon as the opening is there, and I'm hopeful that at some point that will happen. It's really, really good to have people who are interested and really keen to work at Alfresco. So yes, please do keep in touch.
I think there's a way to do that through alfresco.com careers.
Yeah.
I haven't checked that site in a while. If there isn't, then send it to info@alfresco.com and we'll send.
Yeah. Good.
very good to get to know everybody, even on an additional level. And I have to say, it's great for the viewers to be able to meet everybody, because when you go to the Docs site and you submit feedback, if you leave your email address, one of these people will email you back. And so then you'll know what they do and a little bit of the background. So encourage you to do that. So have a whole list of questions that came. Hopefully we have enough time to cover it all. So the first question is how the Alfresco's grown. There's multiple teams that participate in communicating to the customer and communicating to the developers. There's the developer platform team with our developer evangelist. There's support and their knowledge base. There's the user assistance team. How do these teams work together?
Okay, I'll take that. So I guess I'll sort of start with the developer platform side, and then go on to talk about the knowledge base, the customer support knowledge base. So, I mean, just to give a bit of background to how we work as a team, as I say, we work within engineering, and what we try to do as much as possible is have someone, one or two people involved in each engineering team, hopefully from the early stages, and we work alongside the engineers in each of those teams. And really the developer platform team is just another engineering team, and it's a sort of fairly cross-functional team with product owner, engineers in there, and at the moment 2 technical writers. So we've got Tim and Tony working within that developer platform team, within their sprint cycles, and they're sort of heavily involved in that particular area at the moment. So we also, as part of that team, we're very, very lucky at the moment, in fact hugely privileged really, to have Martin Berlung involved in writing some of that documentation. I think some people might be aware of that already, but he's been a huge help for us because he's brought his tremendous experience as a developer, Alfresco developer, to the documentation. And I like to think really that for this next few releases, we've put a lot more effort into the developer documentation than we've ever done before. Some of that's down to the effort involved in it, and some of it is that's down to the sort of product management influence and definition over what we consider to be our extension points, for example. I think that clear definition has helped us to improve that documentation set. So that, I think, is how we sort of work within that developer platform team. As far as the knowledge base is concerned, the support knowledge base, I mean that's sort of treated as a sort of separate area of documentation. It's available in the support portal. Usually, the information that comes through there is quite customer specific. It's fairly niche. It may or may not appear in the official documentation. It really depends on the area that's been covered. So it is another source of information, but we have to sort of balance the sort of value of adding that into the documentation versus whether it's sort of too sort of much of an edge case really to cover as part of the official documentation. So that's really where that sits with what we do.
So Martin is an engineer. Martin and Oli's our developer evangelist, and they are assisting with some of the user assistance stuff in addition to the regular responsibilities. And support takes feedback from the customer and deals with those specific concerns, and some of that feeds into the long-term documentation? Yeah.
So I mean, the knowledge base is sort of obviously a source of information, but we work really closely with the support team. In fact, I would say they're our first-line customer. They're the people who deal with the support calls, so they have the experience of what the customer is having to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So we've got a huge vested interest in keeping the support team up to date and happy with what we're producing in the documentation. So we work really, really closely with them. So they might, for example, with a new piece of documentation, they might be part of our review team, but also any kind of customer call that comes through, they may raise a documentation ticket on the basis of that call with the customer. So yeah, we have a huge amount of contact with support.
And how does documentation go from an idea to something that we've got posted, and then what happens after that? What's the full life cycle?
So Sophie, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So I guess we have a range of requirements, I guess, that come into the team. You know, we look at new function, which might come from customer requirements, as Hannah mentioned. It might be that it's a new area that the product managers have decided through talking to maybe a number of customers and looking at the product in general that we need to sort of document. It could be a comment coming in from a customer that you mentioned, Richard, so you can submit your feedback, and we might think that's a good idea that we can easily implement possibly. So we've got new, I guess, and also maintenance. So the same team, our little team, looks after not only the new function but maintenance of the product as well. So when we get those requirements in, we'll document them. We'll publish them as part of our documentation set, possibly as part of a release. But we're quite agile in our documentation in that we can publish that whenever we want to, based on kind of our schedule and availability, really. And then we will support that documentation through, we support through to 3.4 currently, so that's still live. We don't take down any information sets, but we might not necessarily carry on maintaining that after the product is not supported anymore. So that's kind of, I guess that's the life cycle generally.
Yeah, the documentation has really expanded, I think, over the last, well, especially since 4.0. It seems like the breadth has gotten a lot broader, a lot more stuff for your team to maintain.
Yeah, it is, and it's a real juggling act sometimes, I think, in terms of, new function is what everyone wants to see, but it's really, really important that we make sure everything's right, and, if there are any service packs coming up, we need to reflect those and anything else. So, it's all pretty key.
We frequently get the request for multilingual documentation. In fact, Suzanne in the chat channel is asking about German specifically. Is that something we're going to be able to get done?
Yeah, I noticed there was a forum question recently as well about German. It's quite often French. We get asked about French translation as well. So yeah, we quite regularly get requests for documentation in various language sets. And we have evaluated the cost of translation in the past. For example, we've done quotes for Japanese translation of the administration documentation. The bottom line is that it's extremely expensive, and even the initial costs are expensive, and on top of that we have the sort of regular releases and the sort of overall maintenance costs. And so basically at the moment it's that cost is too heavy really for Alfresco. We're always evaluating that decision, and it's not my decision alone. Obviously, it's a business decision, and we're always evaluating that. And in fact, because of these recent requests, this is something I will raise again, and we'll have discussions about that. So the more it's requested, obviously, the more we'll look into it. So I do appreciate that's a really important aspect for a lot of people.
And that's the really technical documentation that's English only.
Yeah, so the one I was going to say, the one thing I would say is that we do localize a small subset of the documentation, which is for the mobile app, and it is available from the doc site, but it's primarily designed to work with the app. And I mean, maybe if Andy, you could just explain a little bit more about what's involved in that.
Yeah, so it's not actually that complicated. So we localize all the mobile documentation into, I think, 6, maybe 7 different languages, same number that we produce the app in. The app is then able to lift the help directly into a viewer there. So instead of being taken away onto the documentation site, you can view the help from directly within the app itself when you click the help button. So that kind of makes it more contextual, and you can just flick through to the section that you need to find. Because it is a relatively small amount of documentation and very self-contained, that's why we're able to translate that, because it makes sense in that case.
No, and so would you consider in the future having the user-oriented, so in the product there's a link to the documentation that's more user-oriented. Would that section be more likely to be translated like the mobile app user documentation is?
I would say so, yeah. That and actually that is that's one of the areas that we have looked at in the past, is that if we focus on the end user sort of onboarding experience, then maybe that would be the way forward, really. So that I would say is probably the first line for localization. The rest of the documentation, the more technical documentation, that's where we will have more and more debates about, I'm sure, over time.
It's that trade-off between documenting lots of stuff or making sure it's available in every language. Just always more work to do than we can get done.
Yeah.
So one of the requests we get a lot is having screenshots in the documentation and making it easier for people to visualize what's going on. Is that something we're looking at?
Yep. Sophie, would you like to cover that again?
Yeah, sure. So I think we are working really hard to try and put more and more images and screen captures into the docs. It is always a problem to maintain because, as you can imagine, as we change things, particularly for screen captures, they need updating. But we do realise how important those are, and particularly with images, how crucial that is to really explain a sort of a difficult concept. So I think if you look in sort of the 5.0 docs and what we're working on now, we are definitely kind of packing in as much as we can, and we've really sort of invested in videos. So quite a few of us in the team now are producing videos, as Helen mentioned. On the admin side as well as on the user side, we're looking at. So hopefully that's as useful, if not more useful. So, but yeah, we're definitely getting there, I hope. But please keep feeding back, and anything you think would be useful, then just let us know.
And I think I would also like to add that we now use a standard platform for creating most of our diagrams, almost every diagram, so that diagrams are consistent in terms of the colors we use, the components. So yes, in 5.0 and in all the future versions of Alfresco documentation, using more and more diagrams.
Yeah,
I have noticed there are a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the key. I think that there are a lot more diagrams for the new content. Obviously, we've got to try and work on backfixing the older images, and that's on our list of things to do as well. And we're actually just recreating a lot of those images because actually some of them we don't even have the source for them, so actually maintaining them was a nightmare. So actually we've been working through some of the old images and recreating them so that it's a bit more flexible and we can improve and obviously make them consistent, as Manu has said. So yeah.
Yeah, both the videos and the diagrams I found really useful, and I have noticed more screenshots as well. The challenge of trying to have screenshots and localize, it seems like once you made a decision, it was able to add a lot more of the visuals.
Yeah.
So, well, another frequent request always comes up. When can we comment on the documentation? When can there be public comments?
This is my favorite question, Richard.
We've discussed this for years.
Yeah, we have, and that's a good thing. I think it's a really good thing to talk about it, and the initial answer from me is that we have no plans for public comments, and we have debated this for some time. So this is not sort of a decision we just made lightly. But we feel that we can't currently commit to maintaining and moderating the content. It's an overhead for essentially our very small team. And interestingly, other businesses have also found that they're quite hard to maintain. And even only earlier this year, Atlassian decided to withdraw that service. And they're having to sort of make a public statement about why they've had to do that. Interestingly, about overhead of the work. I don't really want us to offer commenting only to remove it later because we'll have the sort of dilemma of what to do with the comments that are out there and how we sort of archive that away and what happens to it. So really, until we have the bandwidth, I don't want to make that commitment. So really, the best place for any kind of discussion about the documentation is currently the forums. I mean, there's the opportunity to raise anything in the forums. So actually, with the use of the unique URL for a page, you can even refer directly to a page. So I think that's the best place for it at the moment. So.
And I really pushed hard for us to have public comments, but after wrestling the spam problem on our other sites for years, it just worn me down. I don't want to add a new spam vector to our sites. It's why we can't have nice things. People come in and ruin it.
Yeah.
There's a bit of an echo. I think somebody turned their mic on in your room.
Can you still hear the echo?
Yeah. So I'll just we'll move forward because I'll stop talking about it. But you brought up the question of how to raise report a specific how to raise a question about an article. You mentioned you can do it in the forums. What other ways can people give feedback?
Yep. I mean, there are many ways to give feedback on the documentation. I guess if you're in the documentation, the quickest and easiest way is to use the feedback form. There's a feedback form at the bottom of every page, and that feedback, as we've already mentioned, it goes directly to this team. It goes. Everyone in this team sees the feedback that comes through that form. And when somebody does leave an email address, we do try to reply to every single person who submits their feedback. What we're trying to do is where some feedback requires some investigation, we are raising a JIRA ticket. At the moment it's an internal JIRA ticket, but actually I'm working on making that more external. So actually what I'm wanting to do is, so we've got a more automatic way of logging those feedback postings and then being able to open up the discussion around it so that there's some visibility to that feedback. So I'm hoping at least that way it doesn't appear like it goes off into a black hole. But the only thing I would say is if you are actually raising some feedback, you're raising some comment, we will have some dialogue with you. So do please try it out, give it a go, send us some feedback, and we will. If you leave your email address, we'll reply to you. So that's a really good way of doing it, and obviously you can send feedback on the specific page that you're on that time, but you can send any feedback from that form. Sometimes that's what people do. They just say, I just need to say something, and they just happen to be on a particular page. So we still get that feedback, and we still will investigate where we need to.
I thought it was interesting that as we were prepping for this call, setting up 10 minutes before the call, your team was talking about feedback you got earlier today and how you wish you could reach out to that person and get more information about their specific concern, but they didn't leave their email address.
Yeah, and that's the real key thing. So any feedback is great, and it can be as anonymous as you want it to be. But if you do leave an email address, it's quite nice to be able to follow up with that person, ask maybe more questions, because sometimes it's taken out of context and it's difficult to know how we could implement the feedback. So it is really useful to have an email address, but you're under no obligation to do that. It's entirely up to you. So. So
looks like
really
Tony's sharing his screen with the feedback on it. Maybe that one doesn't have the feedback form.
Yeah. But I guess the feedback form has a field of that big. You can sort of expand it. But actually, if you really want to add more detail and discuss perhaps a more complex issue, then perhaps it's more appropriate to raise a JIRA ticket in the ALF project, and the ALF project has, so it's ALF, the Alfresco one, and it has an issue type of documentation, and through that particular JIRA you can obviously give more information, a bit more background on the components affected, the environment you're in. And the good thing about the ALF project is that it does have a wider audience for review, so that includes the engineers, the product managers, people like Richard will see them, and it gives a good opportunity to discuss it further. And obviously, this essentially becomes a contribution to the documentation. So actually, that's also a really good way of of raising some issues with the documentation. It might be that perhaps something is missing, so it's not necessarily a sort of comment about a particular piece of documentation that exists. It might be something that's missing, and that's also important, obviously. So, so please do use the ALF project as well. But you know, we're all real people, and we all have our names, and you can email us as well individually if you really prefer to do that. We also have documentation@alfresco.com, so you can email us at that email alias as well. So we'll take feedback however you want to send it to us. So it's all very welcome.
Sujay points out in the chat that he raised an issue in June, and it looks like it got acted on and pushed out a new update. So thanks for your contribution, Sujay.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, actually, just sort of a point of interest as well. The documentation, it's published. Most of it is published in the documentation site, and that's a live site. And we have a sort of an update schedule. So we'll, for example, the most recent documentation will update on a weekly basis. Some of the older releases, maybe not quite so often, but we can publish it and republish it when we need to. So it means that any fix that needs to come through, or improvement or correction in any way, we try to get through as soon as we possibly can. And so that's the key thing with this, is that hopefully you'll see fixes sort of on an ongoing basis rather than waiting for the next big release. So that's what we try to do. Obviously, it's hard to keep up with every single comment, but that's what we're aiming to do.
Very good, no. And frequent request is developer documentation. How can I get a list of all the extension points that can be overridden, and what's supported and what isn't? All that sort of thing.
Yes, Richard, that was why I was sharing my screen. So this is what we're looking at here is just an internal test build of work in progress on developer docs. That's why it doesn't have the feedback forms and so on, rating forms, and what have you. It's just for internal test purposes. But I was going to show you some of the things that we've been doing on that. And Tim and myself have been working very closely with the dev Labs team, as we call them, developer platform. They've been speccing out what the extension points are, and we've been working together to make sure that's all documented. So you can see the developer docs now. We've tried to simplify it as well. So there's a getting started guide that we're working on. We have an architecture guide, which is designed to give you a bird's eye view of what Alfresco is, and that's something that's work in progress as well. We document our various access protocols, and you can get more information on those through these links here. And we're also spending a bit of time trying to clarify things like repository concepts, so people can understand what a node is, what a node ref is, and so on, if you're new to Alfresco. The main document here is the developer guide. So we have sections that, if you've used Alfresco before, you'll be a bit more familiar with. So Alfresco SDK is here. We have a new API guide, and the job of that is to identify what the officially supported APIs are. So we tend to have an overview of that, and then we list the APIs that we support and the support status on those APIs. And then if you click on those links, it takes you to further documentation about those APIs. Now, you particularly mentioned platform extension points. We've spent quite a bit of time identifying those and documenting them. So if you look under platform extensions here, you can see that we have some introductory information on getting started with that. We identify the platform architecture in the case of platform extensions. And then we document each and every extension point along with the support status. So if you need more information on anything, you can just click on that particular extension point to give the support status, architecture information, and all the documentation on that particular thing. So as you can see, we have a list of extension points, the table, so you can quickly go to them. And then it's the same with share. So share extension points, we've spent quite a bit of time making sure that we've identified those and then documented them. So that's the basic structure now that you can see from that. It's still work in progress, but we're quite pleased with how things are coming along at this point.
It represents a huge amount of work. It's very obvious.
Yeah, we've done a lot. There's still quite a bit to do, but we're getting there for 5.1.
It's very good. So how soon can people see it in public?
That I'm not sure about. It's internal only at the moment. I'm not sure what the plans are for a public release of this. Helen might have some more information.
Well, and I guess it's also about the sooner we get the community version out, the better. I'm sure Richard would agree with that. But we will be introducing the 5.1 documentation publicly soon. It's not officially supported, and it will be a work in progress. But soon we're planning to at least publish the documentation, but as a work in progress. I think we've done this. The previous 2 major releases, we've published early documentation, but with the clear understanding and plenty of disclaimers that it is work in progress. Because we feel it's really important to get the documentation out there as soon as possible. So there's no specific date just yet, but we will be getting it out as soon as possible. So.
But does soon mean weeks or months?
Oh, weeks.
Okay, excellent. Very exciting. I've found this documentation has become part of what I reference every day, the internal version. So I'm really excited for it to be public, and I can start sharing links with people that ask me questions.
Good.
And I think Tony might be able to show this, but one of the questions is, are there? Sorry, still lots of feedback. Are there tutorials in addition to just references?
Yes, there are. That's something we're working on at the moment. The bulk of the work we've done up to this point has been to identify the extension points and then make sure we have the necessary reference documentation. We have done some tutorials, and we've also updated many of the existing tutorials. So, for example, all of our content modeling tutorials have been updated to use the Alfresco SDK. You can see that we have, say, on share extensions, we've got various tutorials here, and these have all been updated to use the SDK. If I just pick on, say, one that I mentioned earlier, content modeling, we have content modeling section, then content modeling tutorials, and so on. And they've been updated again to use the Alfresco SDK. So that's something we definitely need to do more work on, but we have identified it as something we need to spend more time on. And that's ongoing, but we've made pretty good progress with that. Some of the other pieces of documentation, so for example, I'll just show you the mobile SDK. In this case, for Android, has its own documentation. So if you're a mobile developer, you can see straight away that when we designed the documentation initially, we made sure that tutorials were very prominent. You can see over here that we have a number of tutorials. Some of them are quite extensive, and they have all the code and all the steps that you need to do that tutorial. And then we have the reference information as well, where you can go in and you can see the particular APIs and so on. Yeah, we're going to try and do better on that. We're going to produce more tutorials, but we had to, first of all, make sure that we'd identified all the extension points and make sure we had the core documentation in place as a first priority. So hopefully that answers your question.
It's good to see how the requests people have made have made it into the product, getting acted on very quickly. So. Sorry, Helen, I bumped mute and I thought I could unmute you, but I can't. You have to unmute yourself. The challenge of having everybody in the same room together. So it's in the top of the screen. There's a mic button.
Can you hear us?
Yes, can now.
Okay. So,
and the echo's back. That's where it goes.
Okay, there we go.
So how can we make the documentation more usable? One of the pieces of feedback I get a lot is that there's a lot of next as you move through little chunks of documentation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. One of the the structure of the documentation is really sort of based on having small topics or pages of content, but the reality is that often we do want to bundle documentation together, and I'm going to let Tim talk about this in more detail because he's looked at this in more detail. But we do take that on board, and we're aiming to really have more pages where we can have lengthier tasks and information. So we are looking into that. So Tim, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes. We've recognised that as a problem, so there are some really tiny sort of what we call container topics, which are right at the top, and they just say what's inside the rest of the topic. That's not really very readable. We've been a bit constrained by the system that we use, which doesn't, which actually has a bug in it that doesn't allow us to combine topics easily, but we're in the process of fixing that right now. And what that'll enable us to do is to very easily combine topics so that you can see the whole thing in one web page. You can see each individual topic in the navigation on the left-hand side. So that's going to change soon. So we have been listening to that.
Very good. You said you've maintained the documentation as it moved from Info Center to, I guess, a Drupal-based system. How's it managed on the back end? I didn't write the new version, so IT have stepped up to the plate, and that's why it looks a bit more professional now. It's a Drupal custom migration module, which basically takes we write our documentation in a XML language called Ditter, and it takes the source for that and builds it using something called the Ditter Open Toolkit, and creates the HTML5 that you see on the docs site. We had that was all produced in-house, so we've got quite a nice publishing system now, and we're sort of we're getting more into it that enables us to be more flexible about how we publish the documentation. Very useful. There was a presentation on how we do our doc stuff at Summit a few years ago, or DevCon or something, so you might be able to, if anybody's interested, you can see that for how the data backend works. We use an Alfresco Partners product, or at least we used to. One of the questions we got while I was preparing the list was about searchability of the documentation, and I don't remember who asked it, and I think the new site's much more searchable. So if you ask the question about searchability, please reach out to me and ask it again so we can have a conversation about what specific concerns you have. There's even faceted search now, so once you do your search, you can go in and say, I only care about 5.0 or I only care about Community Edition. So it seems like that's gotten better. I hope we address that. There was a question about mobile support, or I was a note to myself as I wanted to point out to the team how it's so nice that the new site is very responsive. It's nice to be able to get it on my mobile device in addition to in the big stuff. One of the questions we got was how to get PDF documentation. Currently, you have to put in all sorts of information to get the PDFs. Why do we restrict it like that? I had to mute you, Helen, so we could hear Tim because there was feedback in. So you need to unmute yourself. Helen, you're still muted.
There we go. Hopefully
there we go.
There we go. There
yep.
we go. Yeah, so you asked the question about getting the PDF documentation. So I'm yeah, obviously it's referring to the form that you need to fill in on the front of the documentation site. That form is built by marketing. It's I guess it's a way of marketing, getting information about you, why you're interested in Alfresco, and it's sort of a mechanism really of getting that information in order to give you that PDF documentation. You know, if it was me, I'd just say you can have it. It's fine because it's the same documentation that you can see online. There's nothing different. There's no secrets. So I would like to give it away, but you know, marketing really like to have that opportunity to find out who you are, and you know want to sort of talk to you about why you're interested in Alfresco. So really, unfortunately, I think that's just going to be the way it is for the time being. But I frequently have conversations with them about wanting to change that form and making it a little bit friendlier, so it's just good feedback for me to be able to pass that back to marketing. So yeah, thank you for that comment.
The normal challenges of trying to be open and transparent and open source and still have a business.
Yeah.
We've always got to weigh those two.
Yeah.
So, and what, so we only have a couple of minutes left. I wanted to change tactics. We got a really interesting question about how our documentation team works in an agile in agile setting. Some of our partners have tried to do the same thing, and what lessons have we learned about doing that?
Yeah, do you know, interestingly, I recently went to a conference, a technical communication conference, and it was one of the hot topics there. How does everybody deal with Scrum teams? And everybody is trying to work within that particular setup, and sort of everybody is doing something slightly different. So it's not the easiest thing to do. One of the great difficulties we have is that there aren't enough of us in this team to give to each Scrum team. So often each member of the team has multiple Scrum teams that we're working on. So you're never truly part of the team if you've got another team. You've got to go. Just the logistics of the stand-ups and the review meetings, and plus the dealing with multiple tasks and stories that you have to deal with on each separate team. So it's not easy, but what we do try to do is have somebody who's at least a representative of our team within each of the Scrum teams and be involved as closely as possible with that team. And so we will have stories that relate to documentation within each of those Scrum teams and sort of when they do the sort of sprint reviews. So it's essentially a sort of component team, but we do try to be as closely as possible into those engineering Scrum teams. I guess that some teams work better than others as well. So we've had some real successes. And so, for example, we'll have a lot of the technical reviews are already happening within sprints, but also we've already talked about the UI copy. A lot of that happens within the sprint cycle, so that's sort of a formal part of the sprint as well. So yeah, it's sort of some successes, some we're trying to improve. The one thing I would add as well is that we're working quite closely with the Scrum Masters to try and standardize some kind of best practice and try to at least consolidate the way we work across all of those teams. So it's an ongoing improvement, I would say. Hope that answers the question.
Sorry, I have to keep muting myself as I sniffle, and then I forget to unmute. My head cold, sorry about that. But it is very interesting to see the lessons we've learned from trying to make this work. I think you mentioned earlier that the engineering team can often move faster than the documentation team because it's a very specialist sort of skill, and it can't start until a certain amount of engineering's done, and then it doesn't hold up the whole next sprint, and finding that balance seems to be something we've struggled with.
Yeah, I guess so, and I think there's the balance between documenting everything at every stage of the sprint, and then balancing that with the end goal. So there's a real difficulty with understanding what is the definition of done at the end of a sprint for documentation. So for us, it might be part of a longer-term goal. So we may, in the early stages, be able to do some scoping and planning, have a sense of where we're going. But actually, sometimes it's not always possible to do things on layers according to how engineering does their layering of the sort of each of the sprint cycles. So we have to sort of have our own sense of what is the definition of done at each stage. So I think that's the big difference for us.
Very good. I was just going through the list of questions to make sure we didn't miss anything, and there are 2 points we covered, I think, but might want to. I just wanted to fill out a little bit. So one of the questions was, does the user assistance team ever review the documentation, or sorry, the user experience team, the UX team? They were on office hours a couple of office hours ago, and did they ever work on how to improve the usability of the documentation? And as people saw when they saw that session a couple months ago, it's a very small team as well, and so there's always more requests than we can fulfill. But we did talk a bit about having the value of the user assistance team, observing people using the documentation and seeing the troubles they have. As Tim mentioned, we've tried to improve the systems to make it address a lot of those concerns. It's just a slow process. Then the last question was about end user documentation, and we talked about that a little bit, about how we've beefed that out, especially with the videos, which are fantastic. If you haven't seen the help videos produced by this team on the Alfresco channel, they're there and they're linked from within the documentation. They're a great way to share. If you're the IT provider for your team, for your company, for your organization, it's a great way to help your users get up to speed. But one specific question we got was about having help. If I've deployed Alfresco, how do I help my team understand how it should fit into their life, my non-technical people? How do I help them see a day in the life of using Alfresco? Do we have anything that can address that?
Do you want to answer that, Andy?
Yeah, I'd say it's a very difficult area to cover because there's so many different use cases for Alfresco. Every single company uses it in a different way. Often companies will configure Alfresco so that when you look at it, you don't even know that it's Alfresco that you're looking at. So for us to try and cover every single eventuality isn't really a possibility. So we've hoped that what we've done with the tutorial videos kind of covers that to a degree. You've got lots of short, bite-sized chunks. We've also got a getting started guide, which is right up at the top of the using Alfresco in the documentation, and that kind of runs you through all the basic scenarios such as uploading documents, versioning, creating sites, all the kind of things that most people will be doing. In some areas, so for example in records management, we have a couple of topics on the life cycle of a record, because there you've got a much more standardized path that people will work on the same basis within it. But for the general Alfresco, it's kind of difficult to provide something like that. Obviously, if people have specific requirements, then get in touch and we'll weigh it up, see what we can do.
So documentation at alfresco.com is a way to get feedback.
Yeah.
So we've hit the end of our time. I know that the user assistance team said, "Hey, we've got an engineering meeting that needs to start on the hour." So I know you all need to hurry away. And thank you for your time. I found the process of collaborating around these questions to be really useful. Thank you for the audience that submitted questions. Very helpful for us to give feedback, and it's nice for us to be able to show off the work. I think the user assistance team's done great work, and it's great to be able to show that to everybody. I do apologize that we don't have firm dates for the next office hours or the next Tech Talk Live. Please monitor the calendar. We're going to get those scheduled once we figure out the holiday season and things like that. So thank you very much, and thanks to the user assistance team. We appreciate all the work you do. So
thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, till next time.
Thanks. Bye.